Hey everybody, this is Blake here, and welcome to my review of 47 Ronin, Keanu Reeves' newest movie. So, when this project was first announced a few years ago, I was a little confused, but mostly indifferent. I was confused because I found it odd that Hollywood would want to tackle a very distinctly Japanese story. Usually it does not sell too well in the United States, but mostly indifferent because I had seen that same story told many different times before. I've read a few of the books, I've seen many different movies about this compelling tale, don't get me wrong, but for some reason that tale did not translate very well onto the screen. In almost every case I can think of, they were all solid flicks. I mean, they're good enough to warrant a viewing, but none of them really blew me away. Honestly, the majority of the 47 Ronin movies are very interchangeable. I can't tell the difference between the majority of them. So I just came to the conclusion that the narrative just doesn't translate very well to screen. I have a few theories for this, but let me just say that to really capture the heart of this story, the pacing has to be incredibly slow throughout the entire middle block, and a little bit repetitive too. And if you took that away, you almost kind of ruined the point of the tale. But I might talk a little bit about more about that later on. We'll just have to see. I have so much to discuss about 47 Ronin that I don't know if I'll have time. So I didn't really care, but at the same time, I was a little amused when they announced Keanu Reeves was going to play the lead. I mean, maybe my history is a bit rusty, but I don't remember any white people in the story. But then after that, it's like it dropped off the radar. Then I only hear about it a couple years later when it turns out this was a very difficult movie to make. It had a very tumultuous production, much like World War Z. It seemed like they were filming this forever, and the budget had skyrocketed and possibly even doubled, depending on what numbers are the accurate ones. So it was a recipe for disaster in the making. But then I saw the trailer for this, and I immediately fell in love with the project. It had dragons and witchcraft and all sorts of different kinds of monsters. When I saw the trailer, I thought it was hilarious. And even though I know many purists were groaning, I was personally enthusiastic that they were finally going to tell the real story of what really happened, where a white person led a bunch of useless Japanese former samurai to avenge their lord, and then along the way fought dragons, witches, and all sorts of different kinds of monsters. I don't know why all the previous versions of this story left those parts out. Not since Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter have I felt like I was watching history unfold before my eyes. At least that's how I would describe this movie to people who would look at me with utter bewilderment. Are you sure that's based off a true story? And which I'd say with the straightest face I could possibly pull off, yes, it was. So I just thought that was hilarious. And when I think about it now, it's like maybe I overreacted because 300 technically did the same thing and it didn't really stand out anywhere near as much as a joke, even though I love the movie. But for some reason, 47 Ronin was just making me laugh whenever I think about it. And that is a good thing, because I was definitely going to watch it for that reason. I love movies with absurd concepts, and that's what 47 Ronin really is. It's taking this, historical event that, granted, might have been diluted over the course of time. It's believed that the play, which is what really inspired the majority of the stories, probably wasn't as historically accurate as you'd think. But they took this story and then just made a Lord of the Rings type fantasy, and I think that's awesome. I love movies that are just bizarre like that. And but unfortunately, most movies that have really absurd concepts usually are only funny until you actually see them. And then it turns out that the film is incredibly boring and stupid, and I hate it. Films like The Ginger Dead Man, Thanksgiving, Deathbed, The Bed That Eats, just talking about those films makes them sound really amusing, but the movies themselves are not. They're annoying, and they're put me to sleep. I am very reluctant to watch Sharknado for that reason, because the idea is just so funny that there is no way the film itself is going to be that entertaining. I will be let down. And even though I'm pretty sure the filmmakers weren't really aiming to make a connection to those kinds of films, I am the guy who just compared 47 Ronin to Sharknado. Take that as you will. But then the reviews, of course, came in, and what little chance this movie had of being good pretty much went down the drain. Some people were hoping that this would at least be kind of like World War Z, where the film, even though it's very flawed, turned out to be much better than anybody expected and became a huge hit at the box office. Well, that wasn't obviously going to be the case. But now that I've seen the film, what do I think? It's one of those films where it's funny until you actually watch it, because the film itself is just kind of generic. I was surprised at how ordinary it was. Now, every movie has an anchor. The one thing that's going to get the audience's attention and then keep their attention. In the case of Avatar, for example, it's the visuals. So even though, I felt the movie wasn't as good on a screenwriting level, the visuals were so amazing that I could care less. Or, with Ong Bak, it's martial arts. Or, with Lincoln, it's the acting, and so on. Well, in this case, I didn't really feel that there was any kind of an anchor. You'd think that just based on the marketing, that it would be the fantasy elements, the supernatural bits, that this would be, it would be a pure spectacle. Well, you'd be kind of wrong. It seemed like the filmmakers could not make up their mind whether they wanted to be just a normal but big-budgeted samurai, well, once again, I'm using that term, samurai flick, or if it wanted to be just a total fantasy. So you'd have a lot of scenes and set pieces that, you really do feel like you're just watching your usual samurai drama. But then it would go like the sets would suddenly change to be just totally over the top, expressionistic, and almost goofy looking. Like Kira's castle, for example, seems like it was designed to be the castle of an evil overlord, whereas other sets look just very normal. The world that presented was, I thought, fairly inconsistent. One thing with 300 is that from the beginning, even before any of the more insane elements were introduced, the world was presented as such an over-the-top fictional version of reality that you could buy anything that appeared in the film. And actually, when it became too excessive, they ended up cutting out a few action scenes because the monsters were too unbelievable even for the rest of the movie. And here it would be like every once in a while a supernatural element will appear in the story, but usually they didn't really tie into the main plot overall. Like, it opens with them chasing this giant-ass beast, and okay, that's fine. But then the next supernatural bit involves, okay, the witch, that's one thing. And then you have these Tengu guys, but I don't know, it just all felt like window dressing, and not the good kind of window dressing. What this film should have done, it should have exploited the supernatural elements a lot more. But instead, they're just like random additions that just, I don't know, they felt kind of fillery. And the special effects aren't very good either. They're not bad, but considering this film allegedly cost like $200 million to produce, it does not look it. And I felt kind of bad because at the end a dragon appears, and I guess if you just look at the special effect objectively, it just looks kind of average. It's neither a major accomplishment or an embarrassing failure, but considering I just watched The Hobbit 2 a few weeks ago, it just makes this film look so much worse in the comparison. And that's another thing too, is even though this film it seemed like they were kind of marketing it as Lord of the Rings except with samurai, which sounds awesome, but it doesn't really feel very epic. I suspect that either this film maybe was at one point a lot better, a lot bigger in scale, but maybe they cut down the film in post-production because the final result wasn't very good. And what's worse than a 2-hour movie is worse than a 2-hour movie that's not very good is a 3-hour movie that's not very good. Or maybe, and more than likely, the production was just so chaotic that they just didn't have time to film a lot of scenes, so they had to cut the script down into a shell of its former self. Because it just seems like characters will suddenly be at one location, performing an average fight scene, and then appear in the next. There's not a sense of adventure, of these guys making any kind of quest. It's just walking from one action set piece to another action set piece, and none of the action set pieces are that amazing. speaking of action, every once in a while there was a really cool moment. I really did like the fight scene between Keanu Reeves and Hiroyuki Sanada. That actually was very well choreographed, and I've seen Hiroyuki Sanada perform in many different fight scenes, and he's done very well in the past. But Keanu Reeves really impressed me too. He really sold his techniques, and what was also I think pretty cool is Keanu Reeves' style is very different from the norm. That fight scene was very diverse and really well put together. After that, though, everything else is just kind of standard. The camera work is too shaky. The editing is too jittery. The movements just the actors don't really sell them as well. I really did feel they were kind of rushing through these fight scenes, probably because the schedule was, once again, they had to film so much at a certain amount of time and they were already behind, so there just wasn't as much time to rehearse these fight scenes. Nothing abnormally terrible, just not good enough to really save the rest of the movie. And what made the rest of the movie bad? Well, they spend too much time on bit characters who you don't really get to know enough to really care about, but at the same time it's like they just eat up more screen time than they need. Like, for example, the Lord who has to kill himself early on. I just felt there was too much of him, but at the same time none of it really mattered, and none of the relationships really mattered for that reason. There's no the character arcs are very clumsily handled. Characters go from unlikable to likable too quickly without much of a bridge. And their relationships, like, for example, Hiroyuki Sanada's character, he's playing Oishi, who's the real hero of the actual story. His son wants to join in this quest, and he doesn't want that to happen. And okay, you're figuring it's the father protecting his son. Well, then suddenly the son is with them, and the father never really acknowledges it. Was that cut out? Or what about the bit with Oishi and his wife? They take up enough screen time to slow down the pace, but there's not enough of them to make that relationship really matter. And of course, with Keanu Reeves' character, it's even worse. Keanu Reeves isn't a bad actor. A lot of people do think he is, but he's one of those guys, he only works if the role is good. So in The Matrix, The Gift, Street Kings, I thought he did a phenomenal job in those movies. Okay, maybe Matrix's performance was a little overrated, but in those other two films, I thought he was superb. Here, though, it's just a boring, invincible hero. He's, for the most part, never wrong. He always wins his fight scenes. He's always right in his decisions. This is an extreme case of, the white man has to do everything for the non-white people. I'm surprised they actually did this, considering the controversy surrounding The Last Airbender and then Star Trek Into Darkness, although maybe this went into production before those films. But I will admit that even as a white guy, I was a little offended. And people who really do care about this tale, because as I said, this is a big story in Japan, they're going to be pissed off. So I just didn't like what they did with him, and his relationship with the Lord who kind of raised him is never developed enough to matter. His relationship with his love interest just takes up more screen time and never really matters. You don't make an attachment to any character or any other subplots. And then the villain, man, he made no sense in this movie. He's played by Tadanobu Asano. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, or if I'm even remembering his name correctly. He's primarily known for playing Kakihara in Ichi the Killer, or maybe that's not true. He's actually been in some American movies lately, like he was the Asian dude in Battleship and the Asian dude in Thor and Thor 2, and he was totally wasted in those roles. But he's the main villain. He's Lord Kira. And he does a good job. Actually, this was probably his best American performance. With other films, it always seemed like he didn't really know English, and I don't know if that's true or not, but that just really what I felt about his performances. But here, he handles himself better. He actually has a personality and was much more interesting than he could have been. But I never understood his motivations. He wants Lord Asano dead so he could take his lands, but why? Does his lands suck? They never even really make a big deal of whether, Lord Asano's lands are prosperous and stuff like that. So then once, he takes over, he's still the villain, but I don't know, it just keeps his motivations were always kind of unclear and kind of boring. He seemed to have a vendetta against Oishi and the other vassals of Asano, but that's never made clear. And the actual story, all that happened was he was a dickish politician who insulted Lord Asano, who in turn retaliated and injured him, and that forced Lord Asano was then forced to commit seppuku, which is ritual suicide, and then the villains are trying to avenge him, or the Ronin are trying to avenge him by killing Lord Kira, whose only real purpose as the main villain is starting everything and making sure that the 47 Ronin are spied upon because he knows they're going to come after him. Okay, that's not really very dramatic, but at least that motivation makes sense. What he's doing in this movie just is never clear. Does he want to take over all of Japan? What? Really, though, for me, the closest thing to an anchor this movie had was Rinko Kikuchi's performance as the witch. Her acting is not very good. She's very over the top and hammy, but at least she's entertaining. That's more than I could say about anybody else. The rest of the acting is just kind of the main players, like Hiroyuki Sanada. They're acceptable, but their roles are kind of boring, so they can't really do too much with them. I think Keanu Reeves is really, really boring. He looks cool. That's one thing with Keanu. He's always been good at making himself look cool in action scenes and stuff like that. But since his character is so dull, Keanu Reeves' performance is incredibly dull to kind of match that. Then the bit players, they're pretty bad. It's a case of a lot of these guys are either faking a Japanese accent and it just sounds awkward, or maybe they're speaking English as a second language and they don't know it too well and it comes across awkward anyway. I had some serious Takashi Miike's Imprint flashbacks. But when it came to her performance, she's the only one that really stood out to me. So at least she was kind of fun. But that's really all I could say. The 3D was useless. Watching 47 Ronin in 3D is like watching it in 2D. I only noticed it once when Keanu Reeves is fighting this big trollish dude. Then something kind of flies out the screen, but otherwise I didn't notice anything else. And that's really it. 47 Ronin isn't as terrible as I think some people are going to make it out to be. It's not like The Last Airbender or Dragon Ball Evolution where they're agonizingly bad, but at the same time, at least they're memorably bad. I could remember various scenes of both of those films. Actually, I remember quite a bit of both of those films, which I think I would have preferred more than this level of bad, which is just average or maybe below average. Nothing about it screams terrible, but nothing about it makes it worth watching either. It's sad when at best it's just mediocre. At worst it's just not very good. And that to me is the biggest sin that 47 Ronin makes. It's just not very good. It had all the potential to be an awesome epic movie, even if a ridiculous one, or at least it could have been so bad it's good. Like, I thought the Three Musketeers movie they made a few years back that was directed by Paul W.S. Anderson, at least that movie was kind of, it was entertaining because of how stupid it was, to a point anyway. But this one, just not so much. If you'd like to read my written review, the link shall be provided in the description. I probably would make my points much clearer there. I also did written reviews of... I should get this ready more often before I actually start the video. Tai Chi Zero, a kung fu movie that's very strange. Fright Night 2, sequel to the remake of Fright Night, even though it's also technically a remake, making it a remake of a 1980s movie. And Yip Man, The Final Fight, another kung fu flick. All movies that are better than 47 Ronin, and they cost a fraction of its budget. So that is all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you had a Merry Christmas. I certainly did. And I'll see you guys later.